onwards and upwards. We've got Riverside Writers with us this afternoon, a creative writing group that meet at West Kirby Library. How often, Adele?
Once a month we meet.
And when's your next meeting? Is it the third Monday of every month, is it? Have I got that right?
It varies. It's generally the last Monday of the month.
Yeah. So
unless it's a bank holiday.
But you've got a MySpace, so check out the MySpace site.
Just look up Riverside Writers on MySpace.
Dead easy to find. Adele, we'll get cracking. Have you got a short story in the theme of Halloween?
Of course. How could I miss this fantastic festival? I'm going to read you today the first section of a 3-part story called Spanish Jones. I'll jump straight in.
Go on.
Oxton Village was once one of the most affluent areas of Britain. Many merchants whose fortunes were made in the bustling port of Liverpool, which rivaled London in a bid to become England's capital city, built their homes in Oxton on the Wirral Peninsula, divided from Liverpool by the boundary of the ancient Kingdom of Mercia, more usually known as the River Mersey. Charles and Amelia Porter were popular guests at musical soirees and summer balls. Being generous hosts themselves, they were lively and charming and always the glass of fashion, and their beautiful daughter Annabel was presumed likely to win a fine husband from amongst the sons of Oxton's wealthy elite. Not all wealth is gained legally or fairly, and such was the case for Charles Porter, who earned a steady sum from the manufacturing of ship sails. Much more lucrative, however, was Mr. Porter's illicit importation of fine wines and spirits. Any illegal trade will inevitably bring a person into contact with strange and dubious souls, and so it came about that Charles Porter found himself shaking hands on a deal with Spanish Jones. Tall and muscular was Spanish Jones, with a thick mass of curling black hair tumbling over his brown velvet jacket. His eyes were unusually large and dark, and he wore gold earrings and a heavy sword. His gnarled, scarred hands showed he was no stranger to the harsh rigours of a mariner's life. Charles Porter and Spanish Jones were sat in Seagull Inn on Hilbre Island in the Dee estuary. They supped tankards of foaming ale, having closed their business agreement with a gentleman's handshake. "Unload the cargo at the rear of Hilbre, out of sight of the mainland," said Charles Porter. He took another swig of ale. "There'll be a light to guide you." "The goods will be delivered at midnight," said Captain Spanish Jones, keeping his voice low, "and I'll take full payment in gold then." "I am always as good as my word," Charles Porter replied. Spanish Jones scowled as he rose to his feet and prepared to leave. "You'd better be, for I always take payment one way or another." Charles Porter was accustomed to such threats and took them in his stride. He had been in this line of business for far too long to react with concern. Besides, he was handy with a knife himself, and he had several loyal men stationed close by inside the little inn. Midnight was almost upon Porter and his men as they carefully picked their way to the far end of Hilbre Island, where the Irish Sea crashed ceaselessly against ancient sandstone rocks. The curved sickle of a slender moon would keep their business veiled from prying eyes, and certainly the landlord of Seagull Inn would say nothing, his pockets being well lined from similar trade. The faint sound of oars slicing through choppy waters reached the ears of Porter and his men, and a lantern was raised to guide Spanish Jones's crew, not into land as those sailors supposed, but directly onto spikes of jagged rock. Terrible sounds of grinding, splintering wood rent the night air, sending seagulls screeching into flight. The heavily laden rowing boat swiftly took in water. The sailors struggled in the dark, surging waves, thrashing their way toward the safety of Hilbre, only to be met by Porter's men, who ensured not one sailor surfaced to tell their tale. Then Porter's men formed a human chain and lifted the barrels from the sea and hurried them away to Seagull Inn, where the landlord waited with hot bowls of broth and a jug of mull wine. "3 cheers for Charlie Porter, a toast to Charlie the Knife," and the men raised their tankards in praise of the smiling Mr. Porter and another night's illicit profit. The door of the inn smashed open as Spanish Jones strode in, one hand on his sword and a pistol in the other. Charlie and his men laughed, and several mocking taunts were flung towards a furious captain. "Well, you've got courage, I'll say that much for you," smirked Charlie. "Coming in here on your own?" "Who says I'm on my own?" Into Seagull Inn filed the very same black-eyed crew which Charlie Porter's men had supposedly drowned. Spanish Jones grinned. "A drop of seawater won't harm my crew. You don't know who you're dealing with." The innkeeper's face turned ashen. Only now did he guess the true nature of these resilient men. Spanish Jones said, "Do it," and instantly mayhem broke loose as the drenched men unsheathed a brutal array of knives and quickly slaughtered all but the innkeeper and Charlie Porter. "Tie them up," said the captain. "What are you going to do?" Beads of sweat were running off Porter's face. His knees were shaking, all trappings of dignity obliterated. Spanish Jones walked towards the bar and poured himself a tankard of ale. "We're not going to kill you, not yet, anyway. My crew are going to enjoy a well-earned drink in this worthy inn, and then they'll be on their way with the property you tried to steal from me, plus any interest earned, which means anything else they may take a liking to which might furnish their fine homes around West Hoyle Bank." A horrified cry escaped from the innkeeper. His worst fears had been confirmed. "Gag him," said Spanish Jones, grinning. "And now I've some business on the mainland. Didn't I warn you that I always take payment one way or another? You've brought no gold to pay me with, so I'm off to Oxton, where there's a fine girl named Annabelle." "You leave my daughter alone! Don't you dare touch her! I'll have your life for this!" Spanish Jones chuckled. "You tried that once already, and as you can see, my crew are hard to drown." Spanish Jones laughed and turned on his heel and strode out of Seagull Inn. Charlie Porter tried to plea bargain with Jones's crew, but they mocked his efforts and tied him and the innkeeper securely to chairs before rifling their pockets. The trembling innkeeper was silent behind his gag. He kept his eyes on the floor as Spanish Jones's crew systematically stripped the place of every valuable possession. The two bound captives only managed to free themselves long after the sailors had gone. The innkeeper, once freed of the gag, began babbling about Selkies, about seals which can turn into men and walk upon dry land before returning to the ocean as seals. Porter thought him overwrought, or perhaps a little insane. And, of course, neither man could complain to the authorities without confessing themselves as smugglers. As for Porter's slaughtered crew, well, the muddy bed of the River Dee has offered a soft resting place for many a corpse. Charlie waited impatiently for the tide to turn and leave the vast expanse of sand exposed before he could hurry back to the mainland. The innkeeper's ravings about Selkies kept ringing in his ears as he desperately tried to hitch a carriage ride back to Oxton, but space seemed set against him, and he had to march most of the way. He was too late. His daughter was gone. A damp trail of briny water led along the hall and up the stairs into Annabelle's bedroom, right to the side of her bed. Even the sheets were wet and smelled of the sea. There was no trace of Annabelle, other than her voice, which Charlie sometimes heard on the wind from beyond Hilbre Island, from the large sandbank known as West Hoyle Bank, where seals lounge in the sun. Charlie Porter took to rowing out there until a sudden squall took his life. It's said that his ghost is still looking for her, rowing a spectral boat around Hilbre Island and calling her name.
Thank you very much, Adele Cosgrove-Bray, for a spooky story for this Halloween.
You're most welcome.
Adele from Riverside Writers, of course. You're listening to Seven Waves 92.1. It's